Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. Good morning. It's Wednesday, the 30th of July. I'm Caroline Hepker here in London.
And I'm Stephen Carroll in Brussels. Coming up today, HSBC announces a $3 billion share buyback, even as profits fall short, while UBS Beats and Santander meets expectations.
A powerful earthquake triggers tsunami warnings from Japan to California as authorities prepare for waves.
Plus, more steel than 116 Empire State Buildings. Why China's $167 billion mega dam in Tibet is a legacy-defining gamble for President Xi Jinping.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
HSBC's profits have fallen short of expectations after the lender posted a rise in expenses and took a charge on its holdings in a Chinese bank. But despite the miss, Europe's biggest bank announced a new share buyback of up to $3 billion. With more, here's Bloomberg's Chris Pitt.
Second quarter earnings at the London headquartered bank came in at $6.3 billion versus the forecast of just below $7 billion. The lender recorded a $2.1 billion impairment linked to its holding of BOCOM, while expenses jumped 10% to $8.9 billion. That increase in cost was related to restructuring expenses as CEO Georges El-Hedri continues to deliver his plan for a broad overhaul of HSBC's global operations as part of what he has called a simplification of the bank's global network. In London, Chris Pitt, Bloomberg Radio.
UBS has reported higher than expected profit in the second quarter of $2.4 billion. The outperformance was driven mainly by technical factors, including a slight profit in the unit that's winding down former Credit Suisse assets. Pre-tax profit at the Swiss lender's wealth management unit was below estimates, while the investment bank performance broadly as expected. UBS also signalled that the prospect of cooling trade tensions should provide a boost later in the year, saying that they're seeing, quote, a high level of readiness among investors and corporates to deploy capital.
Well, meanwhile, Santander has reported net income for the second quarter of €3.43 billion, meeting the average analyst estimate. The Spanish lender will start a share buyback of about €1.7 billion. The bank's capital deployment strategy has been a key focus following its cash offer for TSB in the UK and the sale of its stake in its Polish unit.
The US, Japan, the Philippines and other countries are bracing for tsunamis after a powerful Russian earthquake. Warnings are in place on the west coast of North America and Hawaii, according to the US Tsunami Warning System. Speaking during a press conference, Rick Blangiardi, the mayor of Honolulu, set a stern warning for residents.
Pay attention. This is real, and it's most serious. And if they happen to be watching, we don't have these events very often, but when we do, they're real and they're serious. So we just ask you to pay attention and do what you've been asked to do, and we're all going to hope for the best.
That was the mayor of Honolulu speaking there. Waves between 1 and 3 metres in Hawaii are expected to arrive just after 7 local time, 6 a.m. in the UK. In Japan, some regions could get waves as high as 3 metres within hours, according to the nation's weather agency.
The US president is expected to make a final call on maintaining the 90-day tariff truce with China before it expires in 2 weeks' time. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent told CNBC the recent talks with Chinese negotiators in Stockholm had been constructive.
Now here you have the two largest economies in negotiation. And as I've said before, and we reiterated to them, we don't want to decouple. We just need to de-risk with certain strategic industries.
Scott Bessent was speaking to CNBC there as he said President Trump would make a final decision on whether to extend the pause with, quote, a couple of technical details to work out. Meanwhile, Donald Trump told reporters that another key Asian trading partner, India, could be hit with tariffs of 20 to 25%.
The Federal Reserve in the US is widely expected to hold interest rates steady for a 5th consecutive meeting later today. However, dissents from one or more officials could send the message that some policymakers would like to see a cut to borrowing costs sooner rather than later. Wendy Edelberg is Senior Fellow in Economic Studies at Brookings.
Inflation is only running moderately above the Fed's target, but unlike in 2024, when all the factors were pointing to moderating inflation, which was great news, now we have this major factor, tariffs, that we know is going to push up inflation. And so that's got to be on the Fed's mind. I know it is. Of course it is. Powell has said it is. And that is one of the best reasons I think that they'll have for standing pat at the next meeting.
So that was Wendy Edelberg speaking there as President Trump continues to pressure Chair Jerome Powell to cut rates whilst insisting he has no plans to fire the Fed chief. Now, bond yields have edged lower over the past week with traders pricing in a roughly 60% chance of a 25 basis point cut in September. We will have live coverage of the Fed's rate decision today on Bloomberg Radio at 7 p.m. London time, as well as Jerome Powell's post-meeting press conference 30 minutes later.
Those are your top stories on the markets this morning. We're looking at the MSCI Irish Pacific Index 0.4 higher. The MSCI China Index is down by 0.2%. The CSI 300 up 0.6. We're watching for market reaction to those potential extension of the US-China trade truce. Euro Stoxx 50 futures are up by 0.3%. We're watching shares in Hong Kong for HSBC down 3.2%. That's the first share price reaction to the results from that bank, and a couple more earnings headlines crossing the terminal from Mercedes-Benz reinstating its guidance at a lower level due to pressure from the tariff. So they're expecting a car-making margin of as low as 4% this year. That's lower than they'd previously said. And news out of the French payments provider Worldline as well, booking a €4.1 billion impairment tied to its merchant services business. That's as it reports earnings for the first time since facing allegations the company ignored warnings of fraud. Those are your markets.
Well, in a moment, we'll dig into the latest earnings then from Europe's biggest banks. Plus, we'll also take a closer look at China's incredible $167 billion mega dam project. But there is another story that we've been thinking about and is worth highlighting this morning. This is the account of what happened during the shooting in Manhattan on Monday at that office building on Park Avenue.
The building where a gunman killed 4 people was home to some major firms, including Blackstone, and our reporters have been speaking to those working there about their experiences. And that includes John Gray, who's the president of Blackstone, who works in that office, who described in a tearful interview how his phone lit up with security alerts and calls as the first news emerged of the gunfire, and how colleagues were alerting each other on Microsoft Teams chats about the shots heard in the building as well. Now, we now know that one of the 4 people who was killed was one of the asset manager's brightest stars, Wesley LePatner. She was shot in the lobby of the building as she was about to leave to meet a colleague for a drink.
Yeah, there were 3 others who were also shot. A police officer who was guarding the lobby, a private security guard, and also an associate at a real estate management company. And our colleagues have been writing about how that really did seem to sort of all of those people came from different walks of life in New York. It took many hours to then clear the building after the incident, some as late as 11 p.m. It is a compelling read. You will find it on Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg terminal, and we will also put a link to that article in our show notes.
Well, let's bring you more details now on some of the big earnings stories this morning. We've been hearing from 3 major European banks, HSBC, Santander and UBS, with slightly different stories from each of them. Our earnings reporter Chloe Mele is with us for more on that. Chloe, let's start with HSBC then. Big share buyback, but a miss on profits.
Yeah, absolutely. So a fairly sizable buyback of $3 billion, and that's maybe to kind of soften the blow of otherwise quite disappointing numbers. So we've got the main one is a miss on profit, and that's due to kind of 2 main things. We've got, first of all, an increase in costs, and that's related to the restructuring that was started by the new CEO, George Elederi, who took over last September and made a range of different changes to the bank, and those restructuring costs are now kind of showing up in the numbers. And then we also have a $2.1 billion charge on HSBC's holdings in Bank of Communications, which is a Chinese bank, and that the impairment is higher than was guided for last quarter. So that's also a little bit of a disappointment. China's finance ministry had recapitalized this bank earlier this year, and that's because there's a slowdown in the real estate market in China, and that's in turn affecting banks which are kind of dealing with that bad debt from the property market. HSBC also said that with credit losses more generally, it doesn't really look that reassuring. So it expects credit losses around 40 basis points of average gross loans, which is at the top end of the range, the guidance range that it had provided last quarter as well. And that's due to Hong Kong commercial real estate, which is also in a bit of trouble. If there's one bright spot, the wealth business is doing quite well, but overall we are seeing quite disappointing numbers from HSBC this morning.
Okay, so disappointment there. But actually the developing story out of Santander, net income at the Spanish lender was in line with estimates, but then a record second quarter in terms of profit and another announcement on a share buyback from Banco Santander.
Yeah, so quite resilient numbers today from Santander, as you mentioned, that strongest first half on record, the fifth consecutive quarter of record profit. It said that was driven by three different things. So really good net interest income, record net fee income, and then lower costs and provisions. So credit quality actually improved and the cost of risk was lower. We expected to mention maybe some pressures in the US and Brazil with regards to that credit quality, but nothing that I could see in the statement. Maybe we'll hear more about that on the earnings call, and also that new share buyback of 1.7 billion euros and also reaffirmed guidance. So seems to be on a pretty good track. It also said that its acquisition of TSB in the UK is expected to deliver a return on investment above 20% and a 4% increase in EPS by 2028. So overall, pretty resilient set of results this morning from the Spanish bank.
Okay, and no time for you to draw breath, Chloe, because we've also asked you to look at UBS results this morning too. And dare I say it, a bit of a friendly ghost of Credit Suisse returning in their results today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, UBS had a pretty good second quarter overall. So we had second quarter pre-tax profit and net income exceeding analysts' expectations. So as you mentioned, that kind of ghost of Credit Suisse, but also pretty good performance in the investment bank. That's kind of mirroring what we've seen from different banks across Europe, with that market volatility kind of helping to boost that trading activity. One of the key units, however, is wealth management, and that actually missed expectations. If we look closer at kind of why, that was due mostly to kind of low interest rate environment and the weaker US dollar. And without that kind of drag, it would have actually had quite a satisfying quarter. But this is going to be something that investors will probably be looking at, given how important it is to UBS. It also struck quite a positive tone about the kind of calming of trade tensions around the world, with those new trade deals being announced, and it said that would support investor activity and hopefully support results going forwards. So we'll see how shares react to that.
Okay, Chloe, thank you so much for that roundup, powering us through all we need to know. Our earnings reporter, Chloe Millet, thank you so much. HSBC, Santander and UBS this morning.
China has begun construction on one of the biggest infrastructure projects in history. The hydropower mega dam in Tibet will use 60 times the cement of the Hoover Dam, more steel than 116 Empire State Buildings, and is set to cost some $167 billion. It's a legacy-defining gamble for President Xi Jinping, and our reporter Dan Murtaugh joins us from Beijing for more on this story. Dan, a couple of really big numbers there, but give us an idea of the scale of this project.
Simply put, it's one of the costliest infrastructure projects in human history. And when it's finished, it will be able to produce triple the electricity of the Three Gorges Dam, which is currently the world's largest power plant. But this isn't just, building a traditional dam. This is more like Hercules bending the river to clean the Aegean stables. The Yarlung Tsangbo is this river through Tibet. It flows from the Himalaya mountains, and then it takes a sharp U-turn where it bends about 180 degrees and drops more than 2,000 meters in elevation over just a 50-kilometer stretch. What they want to do is they want to drill tunnels from the top of that bend down to the bottom, creating these long, straight chutes where water will build up velocity and spin through a series of turbines and generate electricity before popping out of that tunnel and rejoining the river at its original course.
Yes, but this is also at one of the highest points in the world, isn't it? It's thousands of meters above sea level. What does China, what does Xi Jinping want to achieve with this, enormous project?
They have a couple of things in mind. The two main ones are economic stimulus and clean power, and I think in that order. On the economic front, this is going to create 200,000 jobs. It's going to buoy demand for construction materials like steel and cement that have been hurt by the fall of the property boom. It could boost annual GDP growth by 0.1 or 0.2 percentage points a year all by itself. From an energy perspective, I mean, this could be about 70 gigawatts of power. It could replace enough coal to reduce emissions by 300 million tons a year. And while China has done a lot with wind and solar, they're struggling a little bit with some of the intermittency of that. And this hydropower is going to be a lot more steady and manageable than those. There's also a political aspect of this. Tibet has been a problem region for the Communist Party ever since the country's revolution back in the 1940s. This could bring economic development, more Han workers to the area, and may help the Beijing get a little bit more control over what a region that's been a bit of a sticking point for them.
What are the risks, though, with such a major project, given that there's so much riding on this for the Chinese president and for China?
Yeah, there's a bunch of risks. I think, the simplest one is just this is such a remote region. It's up in the mountains, it's high in elevation, it's very few roads or railways to get there. So getting all the materials, the manpower to this, there's tons of risks of delays and cost overruns for what will already be a relatively high-priced project. But more than that, this is a really seismically active area. The Himalayas were formed by these plates grinding up against each other, and there's still active earthquakes there now. And so now you're bringing heavy construction equipment, you're drilling bores through this area. So, who knows what will happen there. And then there are ecological risks. This is, this drop in elevation creates this really, really unique area where you have this dry, cool Himalayan air meeting with this warm, moist air from the Indian Ocean. It's a rich zone of biodiversity. It's home to more than 150 native species of fish. There's snow leopards, there's red pandas, and, as much as the government and the companies say they're going to do their best to protect the environment, the human beings have a poor record when it comes to being able to avoid trampling on nature when there's money to be made.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've got some really interesting photographs of it looks beautiful from the photographs of the valley. And you also have some nice maps explaining exactly what the construction looks like. What about the geopolitical consequences, neighbouring countries?
Yeah, the Yangtze River eventually leaves China and runs through India and Bangladesh before it empties out into the Bay of Bengal. And India and Bangladesh have both sort of raised concerns about it. India's foreign ministry has called for more transparency and consultation with downstream countries. They're worried that a big release of water could cause flooding in some of their areas. That there has been some talk where the countries, although they have, especially China and India, have a recent, very tense history. They have worked together on flood issues in the past. There was a 2018 flood warning that China gave India when they saw that water levels on this river were high. So there is a chance that they could cooperate and work together. But there's definitely some concern, and we're going to have to see that one play out in real time.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.